Good evening, and in tonight's video, I want to talk about Antifa and Dr. Mark Bray. Who hell he? Well, looking at I've just got his CV up here. Mark Bray is a historian of human rights, terrorism, and political radicalism. He's also a self-styled political activist. I wanted to get his job title right. So, he's been a defender of Antifa, the loose conglomeration of various left-wing groups that come together ostensibly to fight fascism where they see it. So if there is a talk being given by a right-wing speaker who Antifa judges to be fascist, they go and try and shut that speech down. If there is some kind of rally or march, jamboree, big barbecue held by people on the right, or even who claim to be apolitical but who Antifa judge to be fascist, they go in to disrupt and try and stop the event. Because they feel that fascism is such a great threat, you've got to nip it in the bud early on before it can actually take root anywhere. And they do this by being very aggressive, by taking direct action, which often involves violence. They also kick off and engage in a lot of property destruction, as witnessed in various Antifa riots. I think one of the most notorious was the Berkeley riots following Milo Yiannopoulos' planned speech he was going to give at Berkeley, which got cancelled because the Antifa riots got out of control, and there was thousands and thousands of dollars worth of property damage. So Mark Bray is this academic in America at Dartmouth College, and he has written a book called the Anti-Fascist Handbook, where he describes Antifa, and he's been on television a lot defending Antifa. He's not a member of Antifa, or at least he claims he isn't a member, and Antifa aren't claiming him as one of their own. But he has been on television a lot to defend Antifa and their tactics, and to articulate why he feels it's important that Antifa actively engage in combat fascism, up to including the use of violence to achieve their ends. And this book is basically expanding on his defense of Antifa and trying to explain from his perspective as a Marxist historian what Antifa is all about. And I say Marxist historian because this book is not an objective work. I've only read a few bits of it, and I've heard Mark Bray reading from it, and so I haven't read it cover to cover. But I know enough, and what I'm about to say is really taken from Bray's own words. So I watched a video a couple of days ago of Bray giving a talk about his book. He's currently on a book promotion tour, promoting his work, and he says three things in it which individually they're quite worrying, but when you put them together they are really scary with horrifying implications. So first of all, he's got his central premise that fascism is such a threat to society that it must be combated at street level, and use of violence and use of direct political action is acceptable to combat fascism. Now I'm pretty much a rule of law kind of guy, so the idea of actually breaking the law and using physical violence to disrupt something, even if it's a threat, doesn't sit well with me. As a very constitutional person, I believe that the use of force to suppress a threat is pretty much the preserve of the police and the military, and the individual can use violence to defend yourself. So, you know, you're being attacked, you personally are being attacked, you have the right to defend yourself, your family, your property. That's fine if you are being physically attacked or physically threatened. But the idea of going out and preemptively targeting somebody who you perceive will be a threat in the future, I don't think that's a preserve the private citizen. Bray and Antifa think otherwise. So the second thing, and this was in the question and answer session in his talk, was he's asked by a member of the audience to define what violence is. They were trying to get him to talk about whether violence against property, well, can there be violence against property? Well, actually, no, it's called damage. It's called violence or destruction. It's violence and destruction in legalese. If you riot and you hurt people and you smash up shops, it's violence and destruction. So it's not really violence against building, but that's semantic. But Bray then replies, violence is whatever a person thinks it is. So this is a hugely subjective definition of violence. I think to the layperson, violence means an act of physical aggression or the threat of physical aggression towards another human being. The threat of using force on inanimate objects or on shops, on property, is destruction. But Bray says violence is whatever a person thinks it is. So this has scary implications if you are following the kind of Marxist and left-wing logic. Words are violent. You'll hear this. Words are violence. Speech is violence. So somebody saying something you don't like, something you disagree with, something that you take offence at, that counts as violence. Not using somebody's preferred pronouns has been treated as violence. A look, a stance, mere presence is interpreted as violence. So Bray's got this very nebulous concept. What constitutes violence? Whatever you wish it to be. Highly subjective. It's entirely subjective, his view on violence. And then the third thing is that he's asked by another audience member, what is a fascist? Can he define what a fascist is? And his answer is, that's tricky, it's difficult. He can't quite define a fascist. He says that fascists are very adept at infiltrating into other political ideologies. And that's partly true. It's a little bit true, but there are things you can pin fascists down to. There are things that you can detect. There are markers for fascism. For one, it's an intertwining of state, party, and nationalism. So the party is actually in fascism. The fascist party, or Nazi party, or whatever they name it goes under, is the supreme authority, and it merges with the state to become the sole authority. And then it says that the party, as manifested in the state, is the supreme achievement, it's the apex of a nation. So what they're trying to do is morph their political ideology into the concept of the nation state. That's at the core of fascism. It's Mussolini's phrase, all within the state, none outside the state, none against the state. So a fascist state will create this party-led, oppressive authoritarian state and use nationalism to project an enemy. There is an enemy. Communists tend to think of the enemy as internal, and fascists tend to think of the enemy as external. But Bray kind of says that fascism, it's complicated. There's all these different ideologies. There's all these different things that mark out a fascist. And you put those three things together. A fascist is whatever you want them to be. It's subjective. Whoever you think is a fascist is a fascist. Second of all, whatever you think is violent is violence. So you can subjectively point to denounce someone as a fascist, denounce something that they've done as violent, and that gives you authority to go and physically assault them. Bray is a mean, nasty little piece of work, in my opinion, for promulgating this idea. He's teaching students the idea that a fascist is whoever you think a fascist is, that violence is whatever you think it is, and it's okay to then physically assault them. It's scary stuff, isn't it? And what do? Do you resist? I think you should resist. Or do you kowtow and say, I can't beat them, so I'm going to join them?